Well, welcome everybody. Sorry for the bit of a delay there in the beginning. I think we've got about 3 minutes over. I've actually been playing this game, pretty cool little game called Backgammon, and I'm playing the hardest level. And this guy's going to beat me. Look at this. Here we go, and he's going to get me really good, and he's going to lock me out. If you know how to play backgammon, look at that. He's got me. Oh, but Goodness, how did I do that? Now I've got him. Goodness. This it's one of these addictive games, unfortunately, and I started playing 5 minutes ago, and this guy is really taking me to town, and he's going to take me out. Oh, goodness. What can I do? What can I do here? Should I start the Bible study? What should I... Look, he's going to get me again. Oh, goodness. I think I'm just going to give up. Here we go. More important things to be doing as we look at our passage tonight. I'm just going to open up my app, and that gives us a little chance for people to come along. Here we go. Let's open that one up so I can see who is there. Marge, good to see you. Graham, and maybe Jeanette as well, and Brian and Donna. Fantastic, all good. Welcome to Camden Haven Anglican Church Drill Down, and no longer in the lockdown. If you happen to hear a bit of music in the background, maybe you can hear it. You can tell me if you can hear it. That's my daughter. She's doing her exercise or whatever she does in there, and I'm just being nice to her, letting her keep playing. The drill down is where we look at the passage that we thought about on Sunday, and we at church, and we attempt to address any questions that have been raised. And so if you do have any questions, you can put them in the chat there, which I think's that side. I don't know. Let's see. I don't know. I think it's that side. Anyway, and one of the things I realised I haven't been doing is explaining why we want to drill down at all. And I thought that it would be important for us to reinforce the point that as evangelical Christians, and unfortunately that term has become overused and so broad nobody really knows what it means, but I think I can put it this way, that evangelical means that we have a confidence in the Word of God to change people's lives. A confidence in the Word of God to change people's lives. And so that will reflect in the way we do things. So we will teach the Bible, and it'll be very important for us to have that teaching come across and to work really hard on the message of the Bible, because we're convinced that you hear the voice of the Holy Spirit in the written Word of God as it's rightly understood. And that's why we keep working very hard at understanding the Bible. So that's why we do this every week, a prayerful and careful, intentional consideration of the Bible, and that will point us to Jesus and life. And as I said, you can always look up our YouTube channel, and you can see the last sermon or the last bunch of sermons or whatever's been happening on that website there, which is really good. Well, we are back in Matthew's Gospel, and we're looking at chapter 10, and now I just want to pick up one word there, and the word is chapter. We just say, we're looking at chapter 10, and when I say the word chapter, let me just ask, first of all, is that music in the background too loud? Because I can't hear what's going to you. So if somebody can tell me whether they can hear it, or if it's too loud, or if it's not coming through at all, or whatever, that would be great, because then I can make some adjustments here. But we're talking about Matthew chapter 10. And the reason I want to pause on the word chapter is because a chapter is it's an imposed structure on the Bible that was not originally there. So Matthew didn't write chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, whatever. We have imposed that upon the Bible, and it's very helpful for the purpose of referencing, but it is thanks, Cheryl and Alan, so they can't hear it. That's good. You should hear it here. I can hear it. Chapters and verses are very helpful for referencing passages that we want to look at and think about. but it is a terrible grid for interpreting. Referencing, thumbs up, interpreting, thumbs down. And unfortunately, what we keep doing is using the chapters and verses as interpretation. So you might have heard people say a text without a context is a pretext for a proof text. What I mean by that is that a text without a context is just a pretext for what we want it to mean. So people have said, oh, you can make the Bible say anything. And unfortunately, that's true. Half true. You're not actually... I can see there that nobody's hearing it, and only Brian and Donna think maybe they might be deaf. But anyway, thank you. We're talking about chapters and verses, and we want to be able to say that when people quote a verse out of context, we can. It's usually for their own purposes. They want to say something, and so they find a Bible verse and use that Bible verse to back up what they're saying. Now, they're not sinister in this necessarily. They may just be genuinely convinced that their point is right and that this particular verse backs up their point. However, that unfortunately is most of the time not true. The fact that you can recall a Bible verse that backs you up doesn't necessarily mean that's what the Bible is teaching. So when we think about structure, we mustn't think chapter and verse because that will only be helpful for us for referencing but for not interpreting. I do want to point out one way that a verse can be quoted and without its context, and so suddenly become not helpful at all. But the Bible, when we come to it, always needs a context. Every Bible verse that we look at. And so Matthew, actually, I used to have, I can't remember where I had it. I'm not sure where it was, but I used to have what was called a Bible promise box. I don't know if you've ever seen a Bible promise box. Now, this is a classic example of a genuine, sincere desire to hear God speak, and whoever created these things. I'll show it to you. Where is it? There it is. There is a Bible promise box. And you can see there that you all you need to do, I'll just pop in here. All you need to do is you grab one of those. I'll try and grab it. Oh, other way. Here we go. You grab one of those, but you use those tweezers, and you pull the one out for the day. You read it, and that's God speaking to you. That sort of thing. So you can see that the problem with that is you could be pulling out a verse from anywhere, and it is just not the way that it's meant to be. So when we're thinking about context, we need to see how is, not using chapters and verses, but how is the particular book we're looking at structured. Now, one of the mistakes we make is that, is it this one? Yes, this one. This book, we call the Bible, is actually not a book. This book is 66 books, and it's just bound in one lot of leather, or whatever you call that, gaff tape at the moment. So what we need to realise is that even though you might be hearing teaching and there are a whole bunch of Bible verses quoted, it just doesn't necessarily mean you're hearing what the Bible teaches. Can I say that again? Because it's so important. You might hear a sermon or a talk or a conference or something and a whole bunch of Bible verses mentioned. You need to realise, and we all need to realise, that just because there's a whole bunch of Bible verses mentioned, it doesn't mean what we're hearing is the Bible teaching. Bible teaching all comes through context. Context is understood as we understand the structure of each of the books of the Bible. And so I want to show you the structure of Matthew, because, as I said, Matthew's not written in chapters and verses, but in in this. And this, I'll try and explain it to you like this. So have a look at that. There are 5 speeches in Matthew, and you can see them there. And they all, I'll just move my arm so you can look at that, speech section markers in Matthew. Chapter 7, verse 28, 11, verse 1. And I want to show you that because I think it's important for you to see it. Let's go to there. Oh, I keep going to the wrong one. So if we go to 7:28, saying these things, etc., the crowds are amazed at his teaching. Okay, so let's look at another one, 11:1. 11:1, and we see after Jesus had finished instructing his disciples. So it's this after Jesus had finished speaking, this sort of same idea. Let's go to 13:53, and here we go again. When Jesus had finished these parables, and then it goes on. It's the same way of referencing it, but let's keep going because we want to see them all. Chapter 19 and verse 1, when Jesus had finished saying these things, and then again in chapter 26 and verse 1. Did I go? I went past it, didn't I? Yes, here you go. When Jesus had finished saying these things. So what I'm trying to show you is that there is this important structure that Matthew has given, and I suppose what's important for us to see is that if Matthew has given us a clear structure, then we ought to interpret any verse we find in the context of that structure. So you can see here the 5 to 7 kingdom living. It's also called the Sermon on the Mount, the preaching of the kingdom of God. 9:35 to 11:1 is kingdom mission, and that's chapter 10 we're going to be looking at tonight. So we can see there that the section that we're looking at tonight falls in this particular section of Matthew, and so we will interpret it accordingly. So let me just sort of summarize that again. That is to say that each of the Bible writers have a clear structure. That structure needs to be discerned, and the only way we discern that structure is by being familiar with the book or the passage, whatever, the book or whatever it might be. So when we think of this one, we can see that there are as you get more and more familiar with this, you can see that there are these clear speeches, and that in between there's this action speech. So we're able to say, Matthew has this structure. Now, notice the other thing is that there are 5, and 5 speeches, and some people have said that this Matthew is intentionally paralleling or mirroring the first 5 books of the Bible, and maybe, I'm not sure, but possibly. But at least we can say Matthew has a structure. Okay, so that means we're up to chapter 10. And where was it? So chapter 10 is in this section of 9:35 to 11:1. There's this speech happening, which is mostly chapter 10, end of chapter 9, and to the end of chapter 10. And so that's what we're looking at tonight. So the action that happens before it, well, let's have a look at what action happens before it. If we look at Matthew here, we see the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount finishes. It goes straight into chapter 8 and chapter 9. And if you were reading chapter 8 and chapter 9, you would say, hey, this is just, there is a whole lot of the works of Jesus. There's a whole bunch of healings happening and people being called and that sort of thing. And then we have Jesus doing all these works, these miracles. It's the works of Jesus in chapters 8 and 9. Chapter 10, Jesus then calls his disciples to share in his works. Chapter 11 is then the response to Jesus' works, his miracles, that is. So you can see that Matthew has got a flow, he's got a plan. So as we see each verse in that, we're picturing it and understanding it from that context. Right. Okay. You happy with that? I hope so. So let's dive into Matthew chapter 10 with that in mind. So I'll just do that and pop up there. So there we go. We're up to Matthew chapter 10. and we have there that Jesus calls his 12 disciples to himself. Now, what I want to point out is that we have the amazing capacity as Christians reading the Bible to think that it's immediately about us. So we read the passage, and even though this says Jesus called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness, we just seem to be able to block out the fact that it's addressed particularly to the disciples and not to us. And so what we end up doing, and dangerously doing, is we then say, well, these are the things we should be doing. We should be out driving out impure spirits and healing every disease and sickness. This is our job. This is our mission. Now, I have lost track of the number of times that I've heard this sort of thing said. And you hear it said in a church, it's said by a minister, and there seems to be all this stuff going on, so you think, well, maybe it must be true, or whatever it is. Well, it's okay. That person might be wrong, even though he's got a name here or something. He could be wrong. And the way that we'll see that is as us looking at the scripture clearly and closely, prayerfully consider. And then what we are able to do is to really see what the Bible is saying. So let's do that. Who is this to? It's not to us, but it is for us. The Bible is not to us, but it is for us. And so we need to read it in that light. So who's it to? Who's being spoken about in this particular one? Well, obviously it's to that first century group that Matthew was writing to, and he tells them something about the disciples. So let's have a look. So Jesus called the how many? 12 disciples to himself. We'll highlight that. Gave them authority. Here's the names of the 12, and then at the bottom, in verse 5 here, we've got again the 12. So I'm just really trying to push that point. Who's being addressed? It's the 12. And it's the 12 particularly and specifically at a particular time in history. And notice that he sends them out. We do know that he sends them out 2 by 2 from Luke's Gospel, I think it is. And although we ought to check that. So there's Simon, who's called Peter, and his brother Andrew. James and his brother. So you've got these words. Let's do that in yellow. And what we've got, let's keep doing that. Whoops. What I'm trying to show here is that Matthew is showing us 6 groups of 2, and they're going out 2 by 2 into Israel, and we'll see that in a moment. And notice that they have extra bits to their names, which just gives whole backstories. So we've got Simon, who's called Peter, and then there's a whole backstory to that. You're to be reminded of that. His brother Andrew, James, son of Zebedee. So we know that the James and John, the sons of thunder, that sort of thing. Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector, which is like basically saying Matthew the sinner, Matthew the broken one, Matthew the unworthy one. That's how he refers to himself in his own book. James, son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. So Judas always gets that addition to his name, Judas who betrayed him. And now, one of the things to show there, it's an interesting bunch, if we can just pause for a moment and think about that bunch. We've got Matthew the tax collector and Simon the Zealot. Now, just think about this for a moment. Jesus has chosen these 2 characters to be in his merry followers, band of merry followers, whatever, merry men. And so we've got Matthew, who actually sold out to in a traitor sort of way, traded against his own nation and became a tax collector for the Romans, put him together with Simon the Zealot. And Simon the Zealot is like a radical, almost a terrorist, trying to destabilize the government. And so you put these 2 together, This is not like just putting a Liberal supporter and a Labor supporter together. This is putting the absolute opposites together. And what some conversation on those nights would have been amazing between those two, to be a fly on the wall. But as we were saying before, this is not written to us, but for us. And we are not called to mimic the disciples, but we are called to understand what's going on here. And that's simply what Matthew's doing, isn't he? He's telling us what happened to the 12 because we need to know what happened to the 12. And he starts to trigger for us a couple of things. So if you can go back up here, we see that he is dealing with impure spirits. So I'll make that blue. And one of the things that the Bible writers do is they assume that you have, or that you are building, a good Old Testament knowledge. And so Matthew would have had an excellent Old Testament knowledge. He would have been growing up with it. He would have been day by day hearing it. And so these little trigger words, and as we become more familiar with the Old Testament, then these little trigger things begin to line up. And now, so this particular impure spirits really comes from Zechariah Chapter 13. And if you were to look back at Zechariah Chapter 13, God says through Zechariah, on that day, on that great day, the day of the Lord, he will come through and clear out the impure from Israel. And here is this impure clearing out happening. It goes on in chapter 10. Let's have a look at it. Here we go. And here's a surprising thing he says. Do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Rather go to the lost sheep of Israel. So don't go to any Samaritans or Gentiles. Again, lost sheep of Israel. See, it's not just lost sheep, it's lost sheep of Israel. This is the focus of their mission, is Israel and Israel only. And if you were to go back to chapter 9, let's have a look at that. If you were to pop back to chapter 9, you would find this section where it talks about the workers of few. And what it is, Jesus sees, he has compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And so this idea of sheep without a shepherd immediately triggers for us who know the Old Testament, it triggers for us Ezekiel. Ezekiel has a massive big point in chapter 34 of Israel being people without a shepherd, sheep without a shepherd. And not that they don't have a shepherd, that is that they don't have a good shepherd. There's this big promise in Ezekiel that God will come and be their shepherd. He says, I will come, I will send a new David to come. So you're thinking, what is a new David coming, the Messiah, or is God coming? Is it a man coming or God coming? And we know Jesus is the God-man, and he is the one who turns up to lead the sheep. And the way he's leading his sheep is he's got his under-shepherds and he's sending them out to reap the harvest. So even just to pause for a moment, we could use that verse from chapter 9. Remember this one down here, the workers are few, that title there, and say, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Pray the Lord of the harvest to send more workers into the harvest. Now, that's a great thing, and we often hear about that verse read, but you ought to say, is that the context? Is that what the context is talking about? Because that's the first way that we understand the meaning of it. And so rather than it being a little slogan to try and raise money for new workers for the gospel, we say, well, no, actually, first and foremost, that passage is talking about Israel. Israel is the harvest. They are the sheep without a shepherd. Jesus says to pray that God would the Lord of the harvest will send workers into the harvest field. And what happens very next? Well, what happens next is what we see here, is that they go into the harvest field. He calls his 12 and he calls them to go to Jerusalem, to Israel only. So you can see all these things are coming in. These things are ringing in. The message they are to proclaim is that the kingdom of heaven has come near. Notice that whenever they hear the word kingdom, they would have been thinking of Daniel, who Daniel was talking about Daniel's all about kingdoms, of God raising up and putting down Nebuchadnezzar. And then Daniel has this awesome dream in Daniel chapter 7 of, he says, I saw one like a son of man approaching the Ancient of Days. And when he approached the Ancient of Days gave him all authority and all power, and people from every tribe and language and nation will worship. Now, this is astounding passage in Daniel talking about the worship of one who looks like a man. Now, that can't be right, can it? And yet we see in Jesus this happen in the ascension. The ascension is so important. Death, yes. Resurrection, yes. Ascension to the right hand of God. This is when he receives. So the Son of Man coming to the Father to receive in the ascension is the kingdom of heaven beginning. That's the day that has begun. So the message here is that hasn't happened yet. The kingdom of heaven is near. It's the nearness of the kingdom. So just to repeat myself, this is not a mandate for us to do the same as the disciples were doing, which is there in as you go, proclaim the message, the kingdom of heaven has come near. Well, we're not going to preach the nearness of the kingdom of heaven. We're going to preach the arrival of the kingdom of heaven, in that Jesus has risen is at the right and ascended and is at the right hand of the Father. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. So what we will be understanding of this is not, it's not a verse telling us to do these things. It's simply not a verse. Now you might think, yeah, but wait a minute, surely we're to pray for the sick. Yes, of course we're to pray for the sick. Yes, pray for the sick. 100% do it. But that is not what this is saying. This is saying that they were going into Israel, not just praying for the sick and hoping that it goes okay, but every time they saw someone, they raised people from the dead. They healed the sick. Those who had leprosy were healed. There was no, oh, it didn't work, let's give it a couple of goes of this or whatever it might be. No, it was happening. The disciples were amazed at it. And that's simply not what we see so-called healers today. One of my little concerns is, one of my little concerns is that we have in the church well-intentioned, I don't think sinister at all, possibly a bit charlatan-like. That might be a bit harsh. We have these travelling healers and preachers that go around and they say, oh, I'm going to come and heal in your town, and so can I come to your church? I have these requests all the time, and I have to say, thank you very much for offering, but no, we can't have you come. Simply because in most cases, they're going to lead people astray. And a focus on healing, as wonderful and as beautiful as that is actually not the focus of the gospel and of the kingdom for us now. Anyway, maybe we'll come back to that at another time. But one of the verses here, it says there, freely you have received, freely give. Here we go. Freely you have received, freely give, which is really saying there, isn't it, that they are to offer what they have to others for free. Now, if you brought that verse and pulled it out of its context and began to use that for other purposes, you're going to be using the Bible but not teaching the Bible. So I have heard that passage taught this way, that God has given you these gifts of healing, so you have received the gift of healing, so you can give others the gift of healing. So you can pray for them to receive that gift. Now, you could pray for someone and they might receive the gift of healing, whatever. Yeah, absolutely. But that's not what this verse is saying. And see how easily you can lead astray a whole congregation of people and begin to push them in the wrong direction. So it might be a hard thing to say, but something that is important to say. Again, let me say, I'm not saying at all we ought not have a healing ministry or things like that. It's just that we are not called to do what the disciples did, which is a very different thing. So any questions, you can put any questions there. And actually, I'll have a pause for a moment and we'll have some thinking music and Give you 20 seconds to think through things. You might have something to say. Put it in the chat there, or even in the comment below. It's been about 20 seconds or so. So if I see any questions come up, I'll certainly come back to them, giving us some time to think. Now, here we go. We've got to the next part of the passage is here. And here, do not get any gold or silver or copper to take with you in your belts, no bag for the journey, or extra shirt or sandals or a staff, etc. For the worker is worth his keep. Whatever town or village you enter, search there for some worthy person. Stay at their house until you leave. As you enter the home, give it your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it is not, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust of your feet. Truly I tell you, it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. So the reception of the messenger is a sign of reception of the message. And so hospitality is the way that the message is received. So a town that is hospitable to the disciples as they go out on Jesus' mission are being not only hospitable to the message, but hospitable to Jesus as well. So Graham Cooper said, "Why were the Gentiles off limits?" She says, "I was too busy thinking." Ellen says, "I was too busy listening to the thinking music to think." Okay, very good. I'll give you a laugh for that one. Very funny. But maybe that was true. Why were the Gentiles off limits? This is so super important. This is the point. And in the title, on the thumbnail, the title of this drill down tonight, it basically said something like, if you get this wrong, you're going to get a lot wrong. Well, Graham has just hit the nail on the head of the point that we've got to get. And the point is this. The New Testament talks about the priority of Israel. That is, that they are the ones, not better than anybody else, but they are the ones God has come to first and made promises to first. Those promises need to be fulfilled first. The gospel is first for the Gentile and then first for the Jew and then for the Gentile. So the Gentile always follows. Now, the Matthew chapter 10 here, Jesus explicitly says, go only to Israel, because within this there are promises to Israel being fulfilled. And as these promises to Israel are being fulfilled, so then Israel will become a light to the nations. So on Sunday, I had the vision of a globe that was in very slow motion. And as the filament lit up with the electricity running through it, it filled up the light bulb. And those were the limits. The limits were the light bulb. As the light bulb was filled, it was time for the light to escape the light bulb and go out into the room around it. So you know when that light bulb kicks off inside the bulb, that it's going to spread to the whole of the room. So in this particular one, sorry, I keep reading questions that are coming up next and going through them. In this particular one, what we're seeing in chapter 10 is the light bulb filled with light. That's what it's about. And we need to see that because the promises to Israel, this priority to Israel is happening there. So they were off limits for now, but only because Israel needed to be fulfilled and then explode out to everyone else. Now, there's a question here. Raising the dead is mentioned as a power given to the disciples. Please explain. Well, the promise, Isaiah 35, I think it is. Let's go to that. Let's do this so we can watch that. There we go. Where's Isaiah gone? Isaiah 35. Let's have a look at somewhere here. Let's see. No, this one doesn't have the raising from the dead. That does have the other ones, though. The eyes of the blind being opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped, the lame leaping like a deer. Those ones. Raising from the dead is going to be in Ezekiel, and that's going to be Ezekiel 36. So, and that is talking... remember the valley of dry bones. Remember the valley of dry bones. So in the valley of dry bones, there's that vision of... that Ezekiel has of the bones coming together, and there's this resurrection happening, this resurrection of a whole lot of people. So when the kingdom comes, resurrection will happen. Jesus has already raised a little girl from the dead, and now he gives to the disciples that exact things that he has asked, that he has done himself. So really, all of the things that are mentioned, including raising from the dead, is because they are extending the work of Jesus to the whole of Israel. And so that's really pretty much it. I don't know if I can say anything else, or if I've understood the question. If I haven't understood the question, then you'd like to clarify it or something like that. So this whole bit here that we're looking at in the passage is that it will be more bearable for that town. Be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. So the inhospitable town has said no to the disciples, and also no, therefore, to Jesus. Now, there is in this whole section a real emphasis on that generation that were there and then. And they were seeing Jesus in the flesh. They were seeing the disciples doing these miracles. This was really the kingdom in their face, in a way that the kingdom is not in our face at the moment in this period. And so a greater exposure to the reality of the kingdom meant a greater responsibility. They had to respond, and therefore a greater consequence if they did not respond. So continually throughout Matthew's gospel, there is this focus on that particular generation being a crisis point. That's why we've called the whole series a kingdom crisis, because the kingdom is crashing in on the old age, bringing a whole new thing, and people have been mucked up all over the place. And that's one of the things there. Joanne Call said, could it also be that Israel is coming from the dead to light through the disciples? Yes, actually, thank you. What a great way of putting it. That is helpful. So as people are being raised, literally raised from the dead, so there is the light of the kingdom beginning to shine in Israel, and as the light shines in Israel, so the resurrection of Israel is happening, which is beginning of the fulfillment, or shadowing the fulfillment of Ezekiel chapter 36, the valley of dry bones and raising from the dead, the re-establishing of Israel. And it's interesting, there's a whole bunch of things we could say there. Ultimately, that is Ezekiel, the promise of the resurrection, is shown in Jesus' resurrection, and then in the resurrection of those who are in Jesus. That is, we're us coming to life, but then us also looking forward to the general resurrection in the future. Stuff to say there. And Alan says, Joe, I was thinking that too. And there's a saying about that, isn't there? Great minds think alike. So let's move on. Let's keep thinking, because there's some fantastic stuff coming up. We don't want to miss out on it. We want to see how we go. He says here in verse 16, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Now, that's pretty much saying I'm sending you on a suicide mission. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent of doves. He doesn't say lay down and take it. He says be wise, be shrewd, and be shrewd as snakes and innocent of doves. Be on your guard. You'll be handed over to the local councils, flogged in the synagogues on my account. You'll be brought before governors and kings as witness to them and to the Gentiles. So the mission of the 12 to Israel is going to be a witness to Gentiles. Remember that. Just remember that for a moment. But when they arrest you, don't worry about what to say or how to say it. At that time, it'll be given to you what to say, for you'll not be speaking, but you will not be speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. So often this verse 18 of the being brought before governors, etc., is extended into Acts when we see Paul doing that. I think, okay, it might be, but really this is this limited time. This is this mission before Jesus died and rose again. It's really focused here on this, and I think that all of this stuff still is a witness to the Gentiles. Even the fact that we are reading it as mostly Gentiles, we are reading what the 12 disciples did in Israel. Therefore, they are witnessing to us, and the disciples are a witness to us of the promises being fulfilled, and so the implications of that for us. So it's a testimony to you. Now, can I just say here that one of the big issues in the New Testament time was why are so many Jews not coming to Jesus? That is, why are so many, if Jesus is the Jewish Messiah, then why are so many Jews not coming to him? It's not to say no Jews were coming to him. There were bunches of them. So you could think that 3,000 were added to their number that day. There were 5,000. It was growing. It was quite an amazing thing going on in the first century with Jewish people converting to Christianity. But it was not the majority, I could say. And there was this big question that if one Jewish boy is listening to another person tell them about Jesus being the Messiah, and he's really struggling, because if Jesus is the Jewish Messiah, then why isn't Uncle Ben a Christian? Why is Uncle Ben saying Jesus is not the Messiah? You could see that there would be some hesitation there, as people, a significant reason for Jewish people to be hesitant and ask the question, if Jesus is the Messiah for the Jews, then why have so many people rejecting him? Now, that's why this passage in Matthew is so super important, because we are told, Jesus tells us that the Old Testament is to expect this to happen, that there will be a division in Israel. And this division in Israel is not to be seen as a hesitation that Jesus is Messiah, but as a reason to see him as Messiah. There was always that expectation that there would be division in Israel when the kingdom came. And you can see that. Let's go to chapter 10 and verse 21 here. You can see there, brother will betray brother to death, a father his child, children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death too. You will be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. So again, remember, we might take that verse, he who stands firm to the end will be saved, and say, well, that's about us getting to heaven. But and as true as that is, we've got to ask the question, what's the context and the meaning of that verse in this passage? And when it talks about the end, we're remembering of all those Old Testament passages talking about the end of the age coming. And Jesus is really incentivizing and motivating his disciples to keep going. If they hit some persecution, then get out of there and go to the next town. It's a reason to actually keep pushing on and keep persevering to the end. So that's why it says there, if you are persecuted, where is that? Verse 23, if you are persecuted in one place, flee to another. Truly I tell you, you'll not finish going through the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. And that's an important one to see, isn't it? Super important one, as we talked about before with Daniel chapter 7, was that the Son of Man coming. Here in verse 23, they won't get through every town in Israel before the Son of Man comes. We think Son of Man coming means second coming. What is Jesus talking about there? Well, he's talking about his ascension, isn't he? It's way back then, they're in that generation. They're the ones that saw the Son of Man come. That is, come to the Ancient of Days. And We need to see that. Now, that's not to say that there won't be a time when Jesus will return. It is that Jesus will return. There will be a day when Jesus returns. How he's going to do that, I don't know, but it will happen. So we have a good forward focus when it comes to the Son of Man coming, but we have to have a good backwards focus as well of the Son of Man coming, because we need to see for absolute sure that Jesus is not coming to be Lord, but he is Lord right now. And he is Lord because he's received all authority and power. So that's a really important thing to see. It goes on to say, a student is not above his master. All of this is really just encouragement and incentive for the disciples to persevere and to get through this mission, because they're going to experience opposition. It's got to be expected opposition. And here's how we come to these very important verses that are quoted from Micah. And the reason I say they're very important is simply because they're quoted. So there's a bunch of allusions and you could say hints along the way of Old Testament passages. So we saw of that of Zechariah 13 with clearing of the unclean, of Daniel chapter 7 of the Son of Man coming in the clouds, of Ezekiel chapter 34 of the sheep with the sheep without a shepherd, and the coming of the good shepherd. Those are allusions and things that you've got to pick up in the language, but where an actual verse is quoted, then we've got to stand up and take real notice. And here he says here, "Do not suppose I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace but a sword, for I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against a mother, daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household." Now, as Micah 7 here is quoted, it must be so key to understanding what's going on. Micah is talking about what will happen on the day of the Lord at the end time. And basically what Micah says is when the Messiah comes, when the end time comes, you ought to expect a division in Israel, right down to families. So the disciples have got to hear that as they go into these towns, because some of these towns they're going to are their own towns. They're going to be speaking a message that their own family members are going to reject. That's a really hard gig, isn't it? A really hard gig. But not only do the disciples need to know it as they're going into these towns, but the readers need to know it, because it's giving them an explanation of why not a whole bunch of Jews are following Jesus as the Messiah. And the reason they're not following him as the Messiah, because this was always what was to be expected, that the Messiah would be rejected and suffered. That's one of the major points of all of Psalms, isn't it? There were the rejection of the Christ, that is David. Joanne says this: by sending the disciples out, more will be reached. So more can be changed to accept Jesus as Messiah instead of the warrior type that they are expecting despite the Old Testament. Yes. Thank you. And so what Joe's bringing up there is that there was a sense of a real militant type of Messiah expectation. And I want to say that Jesus is very militant. In fact, in chapter 11 next week, the first thing he does is it says after he gave instructions to his disciples, that word instructions is not instructions, it's commands. He is commanding his little army to get out there. But the getting out there is getting out there and bringing healing. So he's not going out with a sword, but with miracles. However, look at what he says. Remember, go back to this. Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth, but not come to bring peace, but a sword. Now, we've got to think about that. What's going on there? The Old Testament has said, when the end comes, the day of the Lord comes, when the Messiah turns up, he's going to bring division. And so it says there, do not suppose I have come to bring peace to the earth. Now, we keep thinking Christmas time, peace on earth, goodwill towards men. That word earth is simply land. Do not suppose I've come to bring peace to the land. The land what? The land of Israel. That's what it's talking about, first and foremost, in this context right here. So he hasn't come to bring peace, but a sword. But the sword that he is bringing, it's healing and a message of the kingdom which people reject. It's astounding, isn't it, that the disciples can be raising the dead and healing the lame and bringing blind people, giving them sight, and deaf people hearing, and they have this message that comes along, that Jesus the Messiah, that the kingdom has come. People are rejecting it. And so what you'll find is the Pharisees, they say, well, this Jesus, he is evil, he is Satan, a Satan in the flesh. A whole bunch of things. People reject him. It goes on that. So just because you've got a powerful healing ministry doesn't mean people are going to listen to you. Not even Jesus had that happen. Why should we expect anything like that? In fact, a healing ministry will, like trying to replicate that one, is probably going to just attract a whole lot of people who are in it for getting what they can, and but not really giving their lives to the Lord Jesus. So it's a very self-centered way of thinking through things. Well, how are we going? We're 52 minutes. Maybe I should just change the length of this thing to be more than 45 minutes. But if I do that, then I'll keep going over. But I'm going to keep it at 45 minutes. You can always switch off and go to bed. That's all right. I'll be here. You can come back later, and you can watch the end bit again if you want. But I'm so close to the end, and we're slowly getting there. So what we can see is there are two ways to respond, and you can see here two ways to respond: anyone and anyone. There's the two ones there. And how's the response? Well, anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds their life will lose it. Whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. So there's some pretty strong words there. And that whole idea of taking up your cross. Now, when Jesus would have first said this, they would have understood exactly what that means. They would have realized this means dying, taking up your cross. It's not just, I've got a burden to bear. No, you're actually on the walk to death. Now, it would have got only richer after the resurrection and ascension of Jesus, because they would have realized, hey, Jesus walked this path. He's not just telling us to take up our cross. He's not some high-level extremist Muslim mufti who tells someone to go and be a suicide bomber. No, Jesus walks the path before everyone. He actually walks the path that he wants everyone else to walk. He's a good leader because he puts his life on the line. He is the good shepherd, and so we follow him. So Eleanor said, so why would he want to cause division? That is W. I'm not sure what that is W means, but anyway, why would he want to cause division? I think he knows. I think the basic thing is that division is inevitable because not all want to be part of the kingdom of heaven, which we will see next week in chapter 11. So we'll come back to that one. Again, there's the two responses there. There is the anyone who loves their life more than me will lose it. That's a pretty strong thing, isn't it? Here is a great division between two people, between two responses. Verse 40, anyone who welcomes you welcomes me, and anyone who welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. That's very rich stuff in there. So when you receive the message, let me put it like this, and I think this is a really important thing to see. To receive Jesus is not to have some external fuzzy feeling go on while you're hearing a song and praying or something. No. By all means have that stuff, but that's not where it is. That is not where it is. To receive Jesus is to receive the teaching about Jesus. In the next passage we'll be looking at when Jesus says, take my yoke upon you, which equals learn from me. So when we receive the teaching about Jesus, we're receiving Jesus. So when we receive the message, we're receiving the messenger, and we're receiving the messenger, the one who sent the messenger, which is exactly what 1 John, if you were to look at 1 John, at the beginning of 1 John, that's exactly what he says. He says, if you have fellowship with us, if you believe what the apostles say, then if by having fellowship with us, you will have fellowship with the Father, because we have fellowship with the Father. So there is the tremendous point that the way that you become a Christian, the way that you live as a Christian, is not by seeking feeling after feeling, but by seeking teaching and growing and learning, because the more you learn, the more you receive, the bigger Jesus is in your heart, you could say. I'm not saying he gets bigger. I think we're realizing how big he is in us as we get this teaching. We just go, whoa, that is amazing and awesome stuff that's there all along. Well, we really should bring things to a close, but let me just repeat our point tonight. If you don't get the point that the message has to go first to the Jew and then to the Gentile, and that is the order, the divinely ordained order, the way the Scripture is worked out. If you don't get that point, you'll misunderstand a whole bunch of stuff. And there'll be more things that you will see over and over, the more you read Scripture, of this division between Jew and Gentile, but that division's the wrong word. This priority between Jew and Gentile, and the wonderful thing that the Jew and the Gentile, after the resurrection of Jesus, both come the same way. There is this whole thing of how does a Gentile become a Christian? Do they have to become a Jew first? Do they have to be circumcised? All those sorts of things. This was the big issue in the New Testament time, saying no, both come through the Lord Jesus. They both become co-heirs. They both become fellow brothers and sisters, Jew and Gentile, together. So that's a big thing to understand the Scriptures. And you don't need to get it all. You just need to begin to get it. And then next time begin to get a little bit more. That's all right. So I think we have come to an end. I think we have. I've said enough, and it's been so good to be with you tonight. I'm excited that we're going through Matthew's Gospel. I love it that I'm able to look at the different passages, and I'm looking forward to next week in Matthew chapter 11, because it's a very familiar passage with us. Had a great Bible study this morning and a whole bunch of ideas that came out of that. So with our group, awesome little group on a Wednesday morning as well, but Wednesday night is awesome also, so don't miss that out. I want to say thank you for being here tonight on the Drill Down. I hope that you're able to take a little moment after this finishes just to pray, Lord, all the things that we've heard tonight, just help me to begin to understand them. You don't need to get them all, just to begin to understand, begin to appreciate them, begin to allow them to soak in, because by doing this, we are knowing God. It's good news. Awesome. I'm going to say farewell. I hope the right thing comes on here, because I wasn't watching exactly what I put on, so we'll see if that works. See you later.